Every detail about this individual points to a deliberate act. The weapon, for instance, secured in a holster at his waist. The gloves were not pulled on in a frantic rush at the door, but were in place long before he departed from his point of origin. The mask was fitted before his arrival, not raised as a mere afterthought. The backpack he shouldered was not empty. It wasn't a bag one brings with the intention of filling it. He had loaded it prior to driving to the location, which indicates he possessed foreknowledge of what he would require once inside the house. Each object on his person serves as a testament to a choice made hours earlier, in some unknown place where this operation was meticulously planned. This is the portrait of a prepared man. And then, a deviation. He spots the doorbell camera mounted at the front of Nancy Guthrie's home. He attempts to obscure it with his gloved hand. The effort is a failure. The lens is too small, the angle too severe. The hand is incapable of creating a complete seal. So he shifts sideways toward a decorative planter and reaches inside. He seizes a small bush. He holds a piece of foliage in front of a security camera. This is a man who came equipped with a firearm, a mask, 2 layers of gloves, and a full equipment bag for what was clearly a planned abduction. And yet, he is improvising with shrubbery at the front door of the very home he targeted. That sequence, the hand, then the plant, the visible uncertainty of someone performing an action they never anticipated, is not merely awkward footage. It is evidence, not of overarching incompetence, but of a single, very specific gap in the information this man was provided. Jim Clemente is a retired FBI supervisory special agent who dedicated his career to investigating abduction cases. He analyzed this footage and noted that a home like this, set back from the road and protected by a good perimeter, presents a formidable target. This means that to invade such a bastion of privacy and security represents the highest category of risk for an offender. So what we are witnessing is a very high-risk crime perpetrated against a low-risk victim, which implies that the motivation must have been far greater than the risk this offender willingly took. And those powerful motivations are typically financial. If that were the case, this would be a kidnapping. Should they demand a ransom, it would officially qualify as a kidnapping. In the absence of such a demand, it would be classified as an abduction. Other potential motives could be revenge, some form of personal ideology, or crimes of a sexual nature. And yes, even in cases involving a victim of this age, there are individuals who commit such crimes. So, while we do not know the motive, we know with certainty that it was of an extremely high order, as it compelled them to overcome such a substantial risk. The next crucial piece of the puzzle is the fact that they removed her from the home. Typically, that action only occurs when the offender possesses some known connection, either to that home, to the victim, or to both. And that connection could arise because he, or they, had worked at the home, perhaps doing some repairs or caring for the garden. It could be the pool or anything else. But some connection that would have supplied them with the knowledge that she lived there alone and that she was vulnerable. The FBI's Video Forensic Analysis Unit, the same specialized team that worked on the Brian Kohberger case in Idaho, was tasked with this footage. They performed a frame-by-frame dimensional reconstruction of the video recording. They used the actual physical measurements of Nancy Guthrie's doorframe as a baseline, along with her front steps and the surrounding landscaping as fixed points of reference. From that analysis, they placed the suspect between 5'9" and 5'10" tall, with an average build. This is not an estimation derived from a casual glance. This is the final product of a precision measurement workflow. He is carrying a black, 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker pack. That particular model is a Walmart exclusive design, manufactured specifically for Walmart's distribution channel. Investigators' initial efforts were focused on Walmart purchase records and location surveillance footage, but Sheriff Nanos recently provided a revised picture. We have now learned that it possibly was not purchased at a Walmart. That backpack is indeed exclusive to Walmart, but who is to say that I did not buy it and subsequently list it on eBay? That is the avenue we are now exploring. The investigation has expanded into secondary markets. The backpack remains a traceable lead, but it now requires casting a wider net. The weapon remains holstered at his waist, a handgun, which is never drawn at any point during the footage. Its purpose is not to be fired. Its purpose is to communicate. You bring a holstered weapon to an elderly woman's home at 1:47 in the morning because you want her to understand, immediately and completely, that she has no options. It serves as an instrument of psychological control, pre-selected for this very encounter. Now, we turn to the physical identifiers that retired FBI agent Jennifer Kidnapper has described as the #1 actionable lead in the case. His eyebrows are visible above the mask. His mustache is also partially visible. His gait, the specific way he moves, his posture, and the proportions of how he carries his body are all permanently recorded in that footage. Retired Special Agent Jason Pack told CBS News that investigators are urging people to watch not just for what this man is wearing, but for how he walks. Kidnapper stated directly, "I firmly believe that one, if not many, people know who that is. Somebody coming forward with who that is the biggest lead right now." Jim Clemente went further in his analysis. When the suspect reached sideways to grab the plant from the planter, as that arm extended outward and the glove rode up his forearm, a marking became visible on the underside of his right wrist. In statements provided to both Fox News and Newsweek, Clemente would later recount the chilling details of what he had witnessed. "I'm convinced I saw a tattoo on the inner part of his right wrist. If that marking is indeed what it appears to be, it could prove instrumental for investigators in either confirming or excluding individuals of interest. It's a critical detail that could certainly help the public. But beyond the tattoo, there was another potential identifier. The man appeared to be wearing a ring. Analysts, including Kidnapper, have pointed to a faint outline visible beneath one of his gloves, likely on the pinky finger, the subtle impression of a ring worn so habitually it had become second nature. It was an accessory worn so automatically that this man, an individual who had the forethought to bring a firearm, a mask, and even 2 layers of gloves, neglected to remove it. Those who are familiar with this individual will recognize that ring. They will recognize the unique arch of those eyebrows. They will recognize the tattoo on his wrist. And then there was the object in his pocket. It was Kidnapper, while scrutinizing the released footage, who first spotted it. She described the anomaly to Newsweek, a rigid, square shape from which an antenna seemed to be protruding out of his pants pocket. Her immediate professional assessment pointed to a handheld walkie-talkie. She then posted this conclusion for public consideration. "The man on the porch," she concluded, "unequivocally had an accomplice, perhaps more than one. You simply do not execute an abduction like this on your own." The visible antenna, the unmistakable outline of a handheld radio for Daffer, the implication was clear. This was a coordinated attack. Former FBI agent and CIA officer Tracy Walder, speaking on a crime investigation podcast, articulated the operational logic behind such a choice with stark clarity. You simply don't use a mobile phone when perpetrating a crime of this nature. Cellular devices constantly triangulate their position using network towers. Those carrier records can be obtained by law enforcement within hours. Every single call, text, or data transfer creates a permanent record, complete with a timestamp and a location. A walkie-talkie, however, communicates over a short distance, requires no subscriber account, and leaves absolutely no signature on a cell tower. After the fact, the communication is effectively untraceable. It is the tactical choice for an offender who has methodically considered how modern investigators track their quarry. And then, Kidnapper made another crucial connection. This, she theorized, is almost certainly the reason that geofencing cell tower data from around Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood on the night of February 1st has reportedly failed to generate any meaningful leads. It suggests the individuals involved made a conscious decision to leave their phones elsewhere, perhaps powering them down miles away, never allowing them to enter the geofenced area. Consequently, there are no pings for analysts to map, no signals for investigators to triangulate, and no digital evidence whatsoever at the scene of the crime. Someone involved in this operation anticipated this exact investigative step and made a deliberate choice to neutralize it. This is not the mark of improvisation. This is the hallmark of advanced planning. It suggests that long before the night of the abduction, the individual or group organizing it had systematically considered the principles of counter-surveillance. They had considered what investigators typically do in the first 48 hours, understood precisely how cell tower data is pulled and what it shows, and made a conscious decision to render that tool useless. Such a level of sophisticated operational thinking strongly implies the involvement of more than one person. It necessitates a dedicated planning phase, a clear communication hierarchy, and a reliable mechanism for coordination. The walkie-talkie is the physical embodiment of that mechanism. And if one person had a radio, it stands to reason there was someone else on the other end of that transmission. An accomplice, stationed outside the home, in position, and waiting for a signal. This accomplice was quite possibly the person driving the vehicle that a Ring camera spotted on a back road 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at 2:36 in the morning, just 8 minutes after her pacemaker went silent, suggesting a driver who was coordinating their escape by radio. They were waiting for the signal to proceed. This reveals a network of at least 3 individuals: the attacker on the porch, the driver of the escape vehicle, and, preceding both of them, the individual who must have provided the detailed layout of the home that made this intrusion possible. Any one of these 3 conspirators represents a potential breakthrough in this investigation. They were methodical, more so than many initial reports acknowledged. But for all their planning, a glaring oversight was made at the front door. The intruder arrived prepared for almost everything, except for the one crucial detail he missed. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera positioned at Nancy Guthrie's front door suddenly went offline. Then, at 2:12 a.m., the device's motion detection system still managed to register activity in its vicinity. But no video was captured. By that point, the doorbell unit itself had been physically ripped from its mounting. A short time later, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker performed its final synchronization with her iPhone. After that exact moment, the data stream ended. There were no further signals. The device had gone dark. At 2:36 a.m., a Ring camera positioned on a back road roughly 2.5 miles away captured a vehicle departing the neighborhood at high speed. It was 41 minutes. That is the span of time between the doorbell going dark and the pacemaker falling silent. 41 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home. For Clemente, the significance of this time frame was starkly clear. The suspect remained inside the home, the crime scene, for approximately 40 minutes, a duration considered extraordinarily long for a targeted kidnapping. With each passing moment, his risk of capture increased exponentially. Then Clemente highlighted a detail about those 41 minutes that is profoundly unsettling. Throughout the entire ordeal, the suspect's mouth remained uncovered. He wore a mask that covered much of his face, at least one pair of gloves, and a jacket, but Clemente stressed that his mouth was exposed for the duration of the encounter. For 41 minutes, therefore, he was breathing his DNA into the air of that house. Beyond that, his eyes, his eyebrows, his eyelashes, and what appeared to be part of a mustache were all exposed to view. A stray hair, perhaps, could have easily detached and been left behind at the scene. He was inside for 41 minutes, his very respiration permeating Nancy's home. Inside Guthrie's residence, each exhalation became a dispersal mechanism, carrying sloughed-off cells into the atmosphere. Eyebrow hairs and eyelashes, imperceptible, would have drifted down, contaminating the environment. For the duration of those 41 minutes, a trail of biological material was being laid throughout the residence, the same house where investigators would later uncover a critical anomaly. They have collected DNA samples that, according to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, belong neither to Nancy nor to any individual known to be in her immediate circle. What exactly occurred during that 41-minute time frame? The cameras positioned inside the home were systematically located and then neutralized. On air, a reporter confirmed a crucial detail. More than one camera inside the home had been shattered. Not disabled, not covered over. They were smashed, an act that necessitates locating each individual unit and then physically striking it with sufficient force to obliterate its function. Such an action is inconsistent with a panicked reaction to discovering cameras mid-crime. Instead, it points to a calculated operation, targeting specific devices whose positions were already known in advance. Then, the recording hardware itself was removed from the premises. The physical storage units were not simply destroyed at the scene, they were taken. This was a deliberate choice, as leaving fragmented hardware behind still presents the possibility for investigators to perform data recovery on its internal components. Removing the hardware altogether is a far more definitive measure. It was secured inside the backpack. The bag that arrived full was noticeably heavier upon departure. This fact was corroborated by the FBI and the PCSD in their joint public statement. The immense effort to recover footage from residual back-end data sources was a direct consequence of the hardware's physical removal, a process which had also corrupted or otherwise rendered some of the footage inaccessible. And yet, there were no signs of a forced entry, no fractured frame, no splintered door, no shattered glass. He simply walked into that house, using a door he either already had access to, knew was unlocked, or one that Nancy herself opened to him. Every one of those three scenarios relies on a sophisticated, pre-existing knowledge of how to gain entry into that particular property without detection or force. He arrived already possessing the knowledge of how to get in, already aware of the camera's locations, knowing what he needed to take, and knowing the layout of the home so intimately that he could navigate its spaces for 41 minutes in absolute darkness, without disorientation, without wasted time, and without any apparent confusion. But then, there was the doorbell camera, positioned at the very front of the house, the one that captured his image with chilling clarity, the one that the FBI's Video Forensic Analysis Unit would later dissect down to the millimeter for this device. He had no plan whatsoever. This asymmetry is striking in its precision. Inside the house, there was meticulous preparation. Outside, at the front entrance, there was none at all, and that exactness is profoundly important, because a random lapse in planning would not look like this. A broader lack of foresight would reveal itself in numerous mistakes. But this particular gap is precise. It exists in one exact location, the front door, and is absent everywhere else. Precise gaps in planning suggest precise causes. So, let me pose a practical question. How does one locate a house that is not visible from any road? Nancy Guthrie's home is nestled within the Catalina foothills, an elevated and sprawling residential area, a spread-out community located north of Tucson. Crucially, her specific street has no direct connection to a main road that would make her address visible to any passing traffic. It is effectively impossible to conduct surveillance on that property from a vehicle on any nearby thoroughfare. You cannot identify the specific house, the correct driveway, or even the proper turn without having either been there in person or having received precise directions to it. To arrive at Nancy Guthrie's front door at 1:47 in the morning and walk with such purpose to the entrance, you must have possessed prior knowledge of both the house's existence and its exact location. So, the question remains, how did he find it? Now, we must ask a harder question. How did he know the layout of the interior cameras? Manufacturers like Ring and Nest do not publish the locations where their subscribers place these devices. That information cannot be found in any publicly accessible database. It does not appear in property records. It will not surface in court filings or insurance documents, nor will it be found in any other records that can be accessed through an online search. The knowledge of where cameras are positioned inside a specific private residence exists in precisely two places, and two places only. It exists in the memory of the person who installed or configured the system, and it exists through the direct observation of anyone who has physically spent enough time inside that home to see them. He was not the one who installed it. He did not live there. The inescapable conclusion, then, is that he was either inside that house himself at some prior time, or he was briefed by someone who had been. And now, we must ask the hardest question of all. How did he know she would be alone at 1:47 in the morning on that specific night? Nancy Guthrie's daily routine is not published anywhere. She was a private individual. While her daughters are public figures, Nancy herself intentionally remained out of the spotlight. No public calendar tracked her movements, and no social media account announced her schedule to the world. There was no predictable pattern that could have been discerned from public information alone. To know, with certainty, that on the night of January 31st, leading into February 1st, that Nancy would return from her daughter's residence, enter her home through the garage, and be entirely alone in the house, and that she would remain so through the early hours of the morning. That degree of knowledge requires access to her private life. It must be recent access, and it must be accurate access. The kind of access that is only granted to someone who is part of her world in some regular, functional capacity. And then, there is the chilling detail concerning her medication. It was publicly confirmed by Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos that Nancy was dependent on daily medication, a reality that made its absence life-threatening within a stark 24-hour window. This precise knowledge, her medical dependency tied to an exact timeline of urgency, is clinical in nature. It is the kind of detail that resides within her private medical records and in the minds of those intimately involved in her healthcare or daily routines. Whoever orchestrated this event understood that her medical vulnerability was a powerful form of leverage, a tool to exert immediate, time-sensitive pressure on family and law enforcement the instant she was gone. That specific detail was not an accident. It was a calculated component of the plan. One must assemble the complete inventory of what the intruder had to know. The address, located on a street obscured from the main road, and the exact point of entry, breached without any sign of force. He also knew the interior camera system, including the placement of every single unit. He was aware not just of the cameras themselves, but the location of the recording hardware, the physical devices where the footage was stored. He knew she lived alone and possessed a schedule so precise it told him the exact night and the specific hours she would be home and unaccompanied. He understood her medical fragility and the layout of the house so thoroughly that he could navigate it for 41 minutes in absolute darkness without a moment's hesitation. Every single piece of this intelligence is classified, non-public information. Every item on that list would have required either direct, personal access to Nancy Guthrie's home and life, or access to an individual who possessed it. An informant had gathered this intelligence and delivered it as an operational briefing, yet somewhere in that meticulous assembly, the doorbell camera at the front of the house was omitted. It is crucial to be precise about what the doorbell footage truly reveals, because it is being widely discussed without this one specific conclusion being drawn. The footage demonstrates that the suspect possessed a complete and perfect knowledge of the interior security system, but was utterly ignorant of the camera at the front door. When combined, these two facts produce a conclusion that transcends mere theory. It becomes a matter of logical necessity. The person who briefed the intruder on Nancy Guthrie's home either was unaware of the doorbell camera, or they compiled their knowledge of the property before that particular device was installed or updated. In his analysis, Clemente identified the exact mechanics behind this discrepancy. The suspect was unprepared to contend with the door camera. He carried no tools with him to force an entry through the front of the house. His plan never involved entering through the front door in the first place. His intended point of entry was located somewhere entirely different on the property. The front door encounter, that whole bizarre sequence with the hand, the bush, and the visible uncertainty, was an unplanned collision with a camera he never expected to be there. The front door existed outside his operational map, which means it also existed outside his informant's operational knowledge. Consider what it takes to accumulate such an intimate level of knowledge about a private residence without living there. As someone who is not a family member, you are not a close personal friend. You hold no sentimental attachment to the home, and therefore no natural reason to commit its layout to memory with the kind of detail required for an operational briefing. And yet, you know where the cameras are. You know where the recording equipment is kept. You know the one point of entry that does not require forcing a lock. You know she is alone. You know which nights she occupies the house. The only way to possess all of this information is to have been inside the home regularly. You had recent and functional access, in some capacity that granted you normal, unremarkable exposure to these specific details, an access that never felt like intelligence gathering, but simply felt like doing a job. In his analysis of this case, Jim Clemente introduced a concept that helps to frame the identity of this potential informant. It is called transitory contact. In the world of criminal profiling, this term describes a type of access that never registers as a relationship, but still yields a profound level of detailed knowledge. A pool technician, for example, who services the property every 2 weeks. A landscaping crew that arrives on the first of every month. A handyman brought in for a specific repair. A caretaker, or an aide who provides assistance with particular health needs. It could even be a delivery driver who has a regular, recurring route to the address. These are individuals who are physically present within a home, sometimes even inside it, but who maintain no ongoing personal connection with the owner. They observe critical details not because they are actively gathering intelligence, but because physical presence in a space inherently and automatically produces observation. They notice which lights are illuminated at which particular hours. They learn if the homeowner is typically alone or if family members are a regular presence. They see the camera mounted by the entryway and the equipment shelf down the hall. In passing, they overhear details about medical appointments, medication schedules, and the simple logistics of a person's daily life. Over a period of months, sometimes even years of regular service calls, an individual with this kind of transitory contact builds an incredibly detailed portrait of how that household functions, often without any conscious intent. They never sit down to compile notes. This picture simply accumulates the way all incidental knowledge does, passively, incrementally, and with chilling reliability. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was the owner of a home in the Catalina foothills, a property that would have required consistent and regular maintenance. In a desert climate where neglect is swiftly punished, there was the pool to maintain and the yard to tend, the life-sustaining HVAC systems essential for enduring the brutal Arizona summers, the routine of prescription runs and medical appointments, and the endless cycle of repairs and improvements. For an elderly woman living alone, a property of this nature is simply not managed without assistance, certainly not the kind requiring physical, logistical effort. And with every service call, a new set of eyes and ears gained access to the home, a private space its owner likely never imagined was being so methodically observed. Yet it was observed over a great deal of time by many different individuals, and for at least one of them, that casual observation eventually transformed into something far more purposeful. Retired Detective Tom McDanough, one of the voices who has spoken publicly about the case, theorized that the abductor had almost certainly crossed Nancy's path before, likely in the capacity of a service provider, such as a gardener or a delivery person. Former NYPD Detective James Stanton, however, distilled the profile into 4 words that are impossible to forget: someone tangential to this woman's life. Tangential meaning a person on the periphery, not welcomed into her inner circle of trust, a name that would never surface when investigators began to map her closest relationships. Tangential, a presence at the functional edge of her daily world, consistently near enough to learn her routines, yet distant enough to evade all initial suspicion. This is the exact profile of an individual capable of acquiring precise, intimate knowledge of the home's internal security apparatus, the specific layout of the recording hardware, and the various points of entry they personally serviced, all while possessing a complete blind spot for the front door, an entrance they would have never used. Imagine the pool technician, who always entered through the back gate, or the landscaping crew that used the side access, or the HVAC contractor who came in through the garage. Consider the caregiver, who used a specific door Nancy always left unlocked just for their arrival. Each of these individuals held a fragment of the property's blueprint, a map entirely accurate for their designated zone, yet completely blank everywhere else. The question then becomes, what would it take to fuse those fragments into a single, operational briefing? The information was either solicited or it was volunteered. In the first scenario, and this is a theory given credence by a former FBI agent who has spoken on the record, an individual with the means and motive to abduct Nancy Guthrie deliberately targeted someone with access to her home, made an approach, and purchased critical intelligence. They would acquire details on the security system's configuration, the access points, and her schedule, all likely procured under a plausible cover story like a security audit, or perhaps a background investigation, or even an assessment for a new insurance policy. It would be a request designed to sound just legitimate enough for the informant to rationalize their complicity. In the second scenario, the transfer of knowledge was less overt. Here, an individual who had passively accumulated this intelligence over months of routine work found a conduit through a criminal association, or was perhaps driven by profound financial desperation, or was connected through a personal relationship to the planners, and ultimately made that vital information available, either directly or indirectly. Both paths, however, lead to the same destination: a strategic briefing assembled from insider knowledge. And both paths are defined by the same critical blind spot, the front door. At this point, it is necessary to pause and examine something directly, not from a retired detective speculating on a podcast, and not from a commentator piecing together a secondhand theory. This comes from former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers, a man who dedicated more than 2 decades at the Bureau to investigating profoundly complex criminal and national security cases. Speaking on the record in an exclusive interview with Parade magazine, Rogers offered this assessment. He believes it is highly likely that an individual who knew Guthrie or had a professional connection to her through home maintenance, healthcare, or yard and pool services was involved. He posited that one of these people could have been hired to provide intelligence regarding security systems and Guthrie's personal schedule. Rogers also noted that this person could have taken one of those jobs for the specific purpose of learning that information. This is a statement that demands careful dissection. Home maintenance, healthcare, yard and pool care. Rogers is not describing some vague amorphous insider. He is identifying precise, functional roles. These are the exact positions that generate fleeting but consistent contact, the kind that yields incidental yet deeply reliable knowledge about a private residence, the very knowledge this perpetrator clearly possessed. And Rogers is emphatic, stating it is highly likely. Those are his words precisely, not a cautious professional hedge. The phrase signifies a strong conviction that someone from within these service categories was directly complicit in this crime. And then there is the word he used, hired. Not speculated, not suggested. He stated that one of these individuals could have been hired to furnish intelligence on the security systems and Nancy Guthrie's movements. Hired implies a cold, deliberate transaction. Someone required a detailed map of this woman's home and her life. And according to a former FBI special agent, speaking with the full weight of his experience, they paid for it. Rogers, however, also presented the passive scenario, wherein the perpetrator himself could have worked in one of these positions to gather the intelligence directly, rather than using a paid informant in a transactional way. Or perhaps an existing worker simply accumulated what they saw and made it available through some other mechanism, a personal relationship, a moment of deception, or even a disclosure made under duress. Ultimately, the method by which the information was transferred is academic. The outcome remains devastatingly unchanged. Details from within the sanctuary of Nancy Guthrie's home had found their way into the wrong hands. And the individual who now possessed this knowledge approached her residence, armed with a comprehensive understanding of its interior, yet oblivious to a single, critical detail at the very threshold. This peculiar blind spot has given rise to two compelling hypotheses, which are not mutually exclusive. It is probable that investigators are exploring both avenues. The first theory posits that the doorbell camera was a recent addition. Security infrastructures are not static. They evolve as people add and upgrade cameras. This is particularly common among the older homeowner demographic, where adult children often advocate for video doorbells as an essential safety precaution. It is among the very first discussions that families engage in when contemplating the care of aging parents who live alone. The logic is to install a front door camera for remote monitoring, creating a digital record of all who come and go. If the doorbell camera was installed or significantly improved after the informant's last period of physical access to the property, then that informant would possess a chillingly accurate picture of the internal layout, but have a complete blind spot at the front door. The suspect, therefore, arrived with a precise map of an old configuration. The doorbell was part of the new one. He was unaware of its existence until he was standing directly before it. His reaction was to grab a bush. The second theory is that the informant never used the front door. One must consider carefully which types of regular service personnel at a home would never use the main entrance. Pool technicians, for instance, access the property through side or rear gates. Their route typically leads them directly to the pool equipment, completely bypassing the home's main entry. Landscaping crews confine their work to the perimeter. Certain repair contractors may enter through the garage, while home health aides assisting with specific tasks might be admitted through a secondary door. In any of these scenarios, the individual would cultivate a detailed and precise knowledge of specific areas within the home. They would know the rooms where they worked, and the hallways they traversed, and the equipment they serviced, all without ever once standing at the front door long enough to even register the camera. Their knowledge of the house was entirely real. Their access was legitimate, but it was also circumscribed. That boundary was the front door. Their mental map was complete for every area they entered, yet entirely blank in one crucial place: the front elevation. The suspect arrived with this exact map. He grabbed a bush. Now, we must return to the walkie-talkie, because the antenna visible in the suspect's pocket signifies something far more important than a mere communication device. It dramatically expands the portrait of who was involved in this operation. If a walkie-talkie was in his pocket, and the forensic reading of the footage was accurate, then it logically follows that someone else was on the other end of that transmission, most likely not inside the house, but positioned outside, possibly waiting in the vehicle that a distant camera captured on a back road 2.5 miles away at 2:36 a.m., just 8 minutes after the victim's pacemaker went silent. This suggests a potential 3-person team: the individual on the porch, the person in the vehicle, and the informant who provided the crucial briefing before any of it started. One analyst was direct: "There is no way you commit this abduction by yourself." Another expert echoed that assessment: "A getaway vehicle necessitates coordination. You cannot possibly manage a 41-minute operation inside a home while simultaneously moving a vehicle into position 2.5 miles away without communicating." The walkie-talkie is the mechanism for that coordination, and choosing them over cellular phones is a highly deliberate tactical decision. It explains precisely why geofencing the cell data from the neighborhood that night has reportedly failed to yield any usable leads. These people were actively thinking about counter-surveillance. They made calculated choices to avoid leaving a digital trail at the scene. They meticulously planned an entry that bypassed the front door. They physically removed hardware instead of merely disabling it. In almost every dimension, this was a careful and well-resourced operation. The doorbell camera is the single glaring point where their planning faltered, and it faltered through no fault of the suspect himself. The plan broke down because the person who furnished his map of the house possessed a critical gap in their own knowledge. A gap that corresponds exactly to the front door. A gap that has now become the single most specific lead the investigation has to unmask that informant. Here is what is essential to understand from this footage. Every element that appears prepared the weapon, the full pack, the intimate knowledge of the interior layout, the unforced entry point, the direct path to disable each camera reflects intelligence that was accurately and thoroughly provided. He knew what he needed to know about the inside of that house. He had been briefed. He walked in with a blueprint. The one element that seems entirely unprepared, the hand, the bush, the visible pause of someone forced to improvise, reflects information that was crucially missing. The front door, the doorbell, the one part of the house that the informant either never had access to or was simply unaware of. The gap in the intruder's preparation is a perfect map of the informant's own limitations. What the informant knew, the perpetrator knew. What the informant did not became his undoing. The doorbell footage is more than a chilling record of what befell Nancy Guthrie on the night of February 1st. It is a negative impression of the individual who armed her abductor with critical information. A silhouette of an informant's knowledge defined with haunting precision by the one detail they left out. And from that shadow, investigators are meticulously constructing a person of flesh and blood. The DNA recovered from inside the home left by someone who breathed the air unfiltered for 41 minutes, whose stray hairs may have settled on unseen surfaces, has now entered the forensic pipeline of investigative genetic genealogy. This is not some conventional search of a law enforcement DNA database. Investigative genetic genealogy does not require the suspect's DNA to be pre-existing within a criminal justice system. Instead, it probes the vast landscapes of consumer genealogy platforms, such as GED Match and Family Tree DNA. The process builds a complex family tree around the unknown DNA profile, pinpointing living relatives, and then systematically collapses that tree down to one specific individual. It is the same methodology that unmasked the Golden State Killer, after more than 4 decades of silence. If the genetic material from the home is viable, the suspect's anonymity is finite. Jennifer Kidnapper stated her belief that this science could be the key to breaking the case wide open. The vehicle seen on the Ring camera at 2:36 a.m. is being rigorously traced. Every car that traveled that road is being painstakingly cross-referenced against neighborhood movements, vehicle registries, and any known links to Nancy's circle of service providers. The Ozark Trail Backpack, a Walmart-exclusive design, its history is now being excavated through retail purchase records and the sprawling resale market. Someone acquired that exact model within a traceable period just before the 1st of February. The physical markers visible in the footage, the distinct eyebrows arching over the mask, the mustache, the tattoo on the inner part of his right wrist, the glint of a possible pinky ring are all being compared against a deluge of thousands of public tips. Kidnapper was unequivocal on this point. She firmly holds that multiple individuals already recognize the man in that footage. Someone out there knows those eyebrows. Someone has seen that specific tattoo. Someone is aware of a man who owns that ring, carries that backpack, and who deviated from his established routine around February 1st. The task force, operating from the FBI's Tucson office, is not examining a cold case. They are pursuing the leads that have survived a grueling filtration process, the ones with enough substance and specificity to be traced back to actual people and the decisions they made, 4 detectives and a sergeant. The complete analytical might of the FBI's Phoenix field office is now aimed at a very particular profile of person, one who had a specific category of access, and whose knowledge is betrayed by the very gaps within it, pointing back to the source. Nancy Guthrie remains missing. For more than a month, her daughters have kept vigil outside her home, leaving yellow roses and handwritten messages. Savannah returned from the Winter Olympics in Milan, pulled away by the crisis to be in Tucson. Annie has been captured in photographs at the memorial, standing beside a note she wrote directly to her mother. The investigation has not paused. It has merely shifted its form, contracting from a wide, reactive search into something far more focused, more surgical. The Joint Task Force at the FBI's Tucson office is working only the leads that pass through their filter, the ones with genuine substance, the ones that can be traced back to real individuals and the choices they made, and somewhere within the domestic sphere of Nancy Guthrie's life, among the people who entered her home to maintain it, to provide care, to assist her with the logistics of living on her own at 84, someone is buckling under the weight of what they know. Perhaps they were compensated. Perhaps they were manipulated, led to believe they were providing details for some legitimate purpose. Or perhaps they gave the information freely and have been watching the news for 5 weeks, consumed with wondering how far the search will go, whether the inquiry will finally reach their door, and whether the DNA now in the system is about to yield a name that connects directly to them. Greg Rogers once remarked on cases of this nature. The greatest probability of resolution arises when one accomplice decides they can no longer bear the conspiracy. When an individual determines that the burden of their knowledge is heavier than whatever has enforced their silence. When they see Savannah Guthrie on Instagram pleading for a miracle and arrive at a different calculation than the one they made on the night of January 31st. The family is offering a $1 million reward. The FBI reward is $100,000. Tips can be given anonymously. The reward, therefore, can be paid in cash. If you possess any knowledge, if you recognize those eyebrows, that backpack, or that wrist tattoo, or if you know a person in Nancy Guthrie's service orbit who began acting strangely around the 1st of February, make the call. The tip line is provided in the description. The next installment deconstructs the chain of ransom notes, what the FBI has truly gleaned from the communications sent after Nancy vanished, and what those messages expose about the psyche of the person who orchestrated this. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found.